Hello everybody, this is Fernando for the latest Mysteries and Disappearances video. Alright, let's go ahead and let's start a whole new series here based on both your new suggestions, some past suggestions, and then also some random ones that I'll just pick throughout various websites. But yes indeed, thank you so much for your continued support on this new series. It does seem like there's some growing popularity with it, especially with some of my past videos. So I'm very happy to share a new set of videos here for you with a lot of good information to share as well. This one has to do with a new suggestion involving yet another disappearance, in this case an unfortunate one of a little boy. This happened a little while back, in fact, back in 1969 to be specific, but to this day it remains a complete mystery about his appearance. It's another one of those tragic circumstances where he literally was just gone between 3 to 5 minutes. That was the last time that someone saw him, and then that was it. He was just completely disappeared off the face of the earth. It goes to show just how tiny the little bit amount of time it takes for someone to just completely go missing, even in an area that involves many people that were around it. And it has to do with this. You're looking at a picture of the little boy now. His name is Dennis Martin, and it has to do with the disappearance of Dennis Martin himself. So what was this unfortunate disappearance that occurred back in 1969? Well, it involved a young boy again by the name of Dennis Martin. His full name was Dennis Lloyd Martin, who at the time of his disappearance was around 6 years old. And it happened specifically on June 14th, 1969. Him and his brother, and then I think his dad, and then his grandfather were all on a trip, along with I believe 2 more friends, if I'm not mistaken, of the boys, on a trip essentially together, going up to a location there in the Great Smoky Mountains. In fact, it was Great Smoky Mountains National Park there in Tennessee. They were all there essentially visiting it, and then I think they were going to spend the Father Days weekend afterward camping overnight in another area. Beforehand though, they visited various locations. Apparently they went to a place called Caddis Cove there in Russell Field, and then they went to a Spence Field near a place called the Appalachian Trail. Some of you that live in that area in Tennessee, this probably sounds very familiar to you, so it's interesting now that you're going to hear this information. If you've been specifically right on that trail, then that's when you'll realize that something like this happened there a couple of decades back. But yes, it was specifically on the Appalachian Trail where this disappearance occurred. And the way the story goes is this. So the young boys, it was him and then the 2 other young boys and then the brothers, if I'm not mistaken, it was a group of them at this point. They were all at around 4:30 p.m. on that day, back in 1969, again June 14th. They were all going to play a little game of hide and seek. The idea was that they would split up. In this case, Dennis Martin being by himself on the left hand side, and then the other 2 boys, or the other 3 boys if I'm not mistaken, on the right hand side. They were going to split up and then hide behind some pieces of woods that happened to be along both sides. So the way I was imagining this as I was reading it is, imagine that the trail, there was a clear trail, a clear pathway, and then imagine some thickets of bush, something there both on the left and the right hand side. And that way, as the family members, the father, the grandfather, maybe some of the other people would walk down that trail, then both set of boys, Dennis Martin again on the left and then the 3 other boys on the right, would jump out from each of those bushes, and then they would scare the adults. Just a harmless game in this case, involving them just trying to scare the adults. Of course, it would just be just for laughs. Nobody would be hurt or anything along those lines. It would just be a lot of fun. And so they did so. They split up and they timed it exactly so that within a few minutes, again 3 to 5 minutes, then the parents would come in to that trail. So Dennis went on the left hand side, and then the boys went on the right hand side. Cut to about 3 to 5 minutes afterward, there comes the father and the grandfather, and then the boys on the right hand side, they jumped out. They said boo, they did that thing, and then they immediately, everyone had a good laugh. But then that's when people noticed the unfortunate circumstance. Dennis did not jump out. He was not seen. And when they inspected that area there alongside the trail involving the bush and trees there, he was gone. They did not see him. They looked for the distinct clothing that he had within the forest to try to make sure that it was him, that he was wearing a very specific bright red shirt, and I believe it was some green shorts as well, so very distinct when it comes to standing out there. And so they hollered for him, but they couldn't find him. They looked around the area there. They even went up to the rugged terrain surrounding it. The father, of course, made a very good search. The grandfather even went farther, apparently, to try to find out. Minutes turned into a longer set of minutes, and then that's when panic started to set in, because they suddenly realized, hey, this is getting absolutely serious. Even with them hollering out there for Dennis, I'm sure at the top of their lungs, there was absolutely no response yet from this little boy. He just flat out disappeared. Isn't that scary? Again, the whole idea that he was just going to be hiding within that bush just around 3 minutes, and then that's it. He was gone. Like that was completely it. And he was right next to that trail that should have been an easy way for him to just come out at that moment, instead of him just outright disappearing. And then if you want to hear about things going even more tragic, when the park rangers were called, they started to do their initial search, and I'm sure they had some more expertise on this too. But then it began to rain, and it wasn't just a light rain either. No, this was a bad rain. It was about 2.5 inches, and it just grew from there. This was just the poorest timing possible, because this rain was making it nearly impossible to try to find this little boy. Because the way it was described is this: the storm was so vicious that the people there had to actually go to shelter. Even then, they even had trouble lighting a fire as a way to try to find this little boy. There was lightning, there was thunder, there was all this rain. Imagine that, just pure happenstance, that you have this mother of all storms happening right at the moment when people are trying to find it, and at the opportune moment too. Like, because this stuff, within the first few hours, that's the only time really someone has to find someone, with all likelihood, the best likelihood, in other words. Finally, there was more panic afterward. There was the day turned into days. In terms of Dennis Martin missing, people were brought in from all over the place. There was even special forces that were brought in. They were nearby, apparently doing some other type of activity, and when they heard about what was going on, they were brought in to try to navigate these jungles, the forest, as if they were navigating the jungles of Vietnam to see what was going on. There were other search crews formed. It was a large amount of people. In fact, apparently it was 1,400 people in total that came into this forest to try to find this little boy, all with great intentions, of course. They were out there through this thicket of rain. It continued on for days on end to try to find it. This rain was just the worst thing possible, because there's apparently a term that people try to do or try to find during that time period. I think it's known as white spots, something like that. It's where within a thick forest you can see something shiny or something white that just stands out, but this rain, or little clues in other words, but this rain just absolutely just completely nullified all of that, because any footprints, any scents, anything involving, let's say, little tracks, maybe little broken twigs, whatever might be the case that would indicate where Dennis Martin would have gone, this rain just completely just obliterated that. On top of that, the people themselves, 1,400 people, were all creating new sets of tracks, new scents as well, so that way it was just nullifying anything else in terms of a proper search too. Again, it was all in good intentions, everyone out there doing their best absolutely possible to try to find this boy, but in the meantime, they were inadvertently destroying any evidence leading to where he might have been. They brought in search dogs, but the search dogs couldn't do anything much because they had to sniff the contents of this little boy against 1,400 other people wandering around the area too. About the closest leads about that were the whereabouts of this boy were this, because after several days, even after a good while, it was finally decided that this was done, like this was finished. The official investigation for this boy was closed down on September 14th, so it was kept for a little while, at least maybe 2 or 3 months. But after that time period, then that was it. Apparently, these were the official leads, or in some of the cases unofficial, but the closest into trying to find out what happened to this boy. There was a footprint that was found somewhere nearby in some of the mountains of a small boy. Specifically, it was the footprint of an Oxford shoe, which was the same shoe that Dennis Martin was wearing at the time. The only thing, though, was that this tip was disregarded by the officials looking around, because it was determined that the footprint was 3.5 miles away from that location, from that trail that he disappeared. So they were wondering, it's too far away for something like this to have occurred so quickly with the little boy. Another tip involved a hunter, someone there, a ginseng hunter apparently, who came forward and stated, and this was years and years and years after the initial disappearance, he stated that he had found the skeletal remains of a small boy somewhere in that vicinity of that trail where the boy disappeared. But the only reason that he didn't come forward was because he was an illegal ginseng hunter, and he didn't want anything as far as the authorities asking him questions like, what are you doing out there, essentially, because of his illegal activity. So he kept it to himself. Eventually, though, after several decades, he came forward with the information, and then he was able to kind of show them around as far as where he found it. But by that point, the so-called remains of the skeletal remains of this small boy were no longer there. There is also the notion that there could have been an animal that maybe took the boy outright. The most common theory is that it was a bear, because of course bears would have been around that area, probably not close by, but somewhere near. So if this young boy, Dennis Martin, just inadvertently wandered into the woods, then he would have encountered, there's a good chance, of this bear, and when that happened, then it just would have been too little too late for him. As far as also the notion about what happened with the boy, could anybody have heard him scream? Apparently in that area, and someone please, if you're local to that Tennessee location, let me know if this is true. Apparently in that area, if you try to yell or scream within the woods, apparently it is so windy there that it simply just gets lost in the air. Like, it doesn't go that far, in other words, as a traditional scream would. So if someone knows more about that info there from a local standpoint, that'd be great to hear. Now, the most, I guess, biggest lead, the most common lead, the one that most people point to, has to do with a mysterious, quote-unquote, unkempt man who is apparently found not nearby, but somewhere at least a couple miles away from the disappearance, right around near and around that time of that same date. It has to do with a witness, a guy by the name of Harold Key, who mentioned that he was with his family near a campground, looking for some bears first, because again the area there is prone to have it, and when they did so, they were wary of anything nearby, and when they did so, that's when they saw what they quoted as an unkempt man. At first they thought it was a bear itself from far away, but no, they saw this man. He was just someone that was just in the I guess closest sense unkempt, like probably shaggy hair, big beard, unkempt clothing, that kind of stuff. He was paying no attention to this guy, this witness Harold Key, but they were to him. They saw him go carrying something, it looks like, over his shoulder, something small. They considered it just dark figured, rough looking, something along those lines. And then he still attempted to remain hidden within the bushes while he was getting around towards his car. And then as he got into his car, he just drove off. He seemed like he was in a hurry of some sort. And then this guy, this Harold Key, the witness, he didn't necessarily pay too much attention thereafter because he had no idea that the disappearance was happening of Dennis Martin nearby that location. Now the FBI looked into it because Harold Key himself notified the FBI afterward. He found out about the disappearance of Dennis Martin, but he didn't do he reported it, but the FBI didn't do much afterward because it turns out the location of where they saw this quote-unquote unkempt man happened to be about 9 miles away. So again, if the shoe print, the one I mentioned earlier, was 3.5 miles away and that was discarded, this one was 9 miles away. So how could the boy have gotten that far away so quickly within that small amount of timeline? The only other credence, though, the reason why people still point to this is because there was apparently a scream, quotations, an enormous sickening scream that was heard by Harold Key. That was initially what drew his attention to that unkempt man. So that's why people still point to this thing, to this encounter, as this unkempt man having to do with the disappearance of the boy, because of that scream, because of his unkempt manner, because of his hurried stance, and then also because of what he was carrying. Something that is small, but it was undetermined what it was, over his shoulders as he got into the car, and then that was it. He drove off, never to be presumably seen again. But that's it. That's pretty much all the info associated with this unfortunate circumstance, this disappearance of Dennis Martin. To this day, again, missing now, it looks like, for almost 50 years. He remains gone. Nobody has ever seen him thereafter. But if anybody has any more info, something I might have missed, something else from the locals perhaps in that area, if there's any, let's say, continued searches, maybe there's annual investigations, something along those lines, please post those comments below. That'd be really, really great to hear. Has anybody been by that area? In fact, anybody at that location there in the Great Smoky Mountains Trail, or National Park, specifically the trails there, the Appalachian Trail? If you've been to that area, please let us know what your experience is like there too. Is it someplace where, yes, indeed, a boy could just get lost, just like this, just like a snap of fingers, or is it something else entirely different that you think might have happened in this case? Alright, everybody, thanks again as always. Take care.